Greetings, and welcome to the second episode of the Unofficial PopCap Podcast. I'm Steve Notley.
And I'm Isaac Aubrey.
Awesome. Isaac, what is the Unofficial PopCap Podcast?
Steve, the Unofficial PopCap Podcast is a podcast about the golden age of PopCap Games by two dudes who were there, who did the thing.
We did do the thing. It is a tongue twister for sure. We also want to really quickly jump in, and as always, we're going to be stressing the unofficial part. We do not speak for Electronic Arts. We don't speak for PopCap Games. We're just a couple of guys who worked in a cool place and thought people might be interested to hear about it. So, Isaac, what are we doing this episode? What is the title of the episode?
This episode is The Buyout. We've decided that we wanted to kind of cover some of the big points in history that people are interested in, it seems, as we look out across the web in this year 2026. It seems people are interested in what happened with PopCap being bought out by EA in 2012, into 2011, I guess it was.
2011, yeah.
And so we're going to talk about that, what it was like leading up to that, what it was like kind of as it happened, so people have a better sense kind of from an inside perspective, at least our perspective. There are a lot of perspectives as to what that was like.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's certainly EA buyout was the most consequential event in PopCap history, and we will just be digging into it. We got an outline here, and so I think basically the way it's going to work is we're going to do a quick overview. It's just going to hit the basic facts like when, how much, who. Then we're going to talk a bit about like the big announcement, which was something that we were both at, and like our sort of personal recollections from that event. Then we're going to get into sort of the nitty gritty, like the follow the money. We're going to talk about our understanding of how the overall ownership of PopCap was broken up at the time of the buyout, with acknowledging that there's definitely gaps in my knowledge, at least on that, and how we are participated in it in the form of our options. And then we're going to move on to a more sort of general conversation about like, well, so what do we feel was the impact of the buyout? Like, what did it all mean? And particularly in how a lot of people go, oh, EA bought PopCap and then it went south. And it's like a lot of the stuff, the biggest stuff that happened to PopCap was not a result of the buyout. It happened in anticipation of the buyout. And that's a lot of the stuff that we sort of saw firsthand. So that is the broad view of what we're going to get at for this episode, and we're going to just jump right in with that overview. So, on July 12th of 2011, Electronic Arts bought PopCap Games for $750 million. That was $650 cash, another $100 million in stocks, and then there was another $500 million in sort of like earn-out bonuses that, spoilers, did not get paid out.
If we hit these just nearly impossible revenue targets, then that was going to happen.
Yeah. But to put that in perspective, so that we're talking about like a $750 million pot of money. To put that in perspective, 1 year later, George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney for, let me check this again, $4 billion. Or PopCap was considered 1/5 as valuable as Star Wars. So, pretty crazy. So, just going to wrap up this basic facts. And when we're talking about the who, the big players here, in my mind at least, that's the three founders of PopCap. It's Jason Kapalka, who I guess you could call the creative director. You know, the terms are a little wobbly, but Brian Feet, who essentially is the technical director. And then John Vici, who, what would you say, describe him as? Like the business lead? Or
like the driving character and kind of person at the business front of things. Seemed like.
Yeah. So Jake Kapalka, Brian Feet, John Vici, Dave Roberts, who we'll talk about later as well, was the CEO of PopCap at the time. And then that's sort of the PopCap side of things. I mean, though of course, there's other folks that we'll may or may not touch on. And then on the EA side, the owner slash, or not owner, sorry, CEO of EA at the time is a guy named John Riccitiello. I'll just drop in this one quote from Wikipedia, which is a quote, in 2025, former CEO of industry rival Activision, Bobby Kotick, said, quote, Activision would have paid for Riccitiello to stay a CEO forever because they, quote, thought he was the worst CEO in game. And in fact, he was out. He was no longer CEO of EA as of March 2013. So less than 2 years after he supervised the buyout for $750 million, $750 million, he was gone. So that is the overview. And so now I guess it's just time to talk about like what happened that day. So how about you just kick off? Tell me what you remember about that day.
Yeah, it was. There was kind of a buzz around the studio for a while that this day was coming, and there was kind of some question like who it was going to be. There wasn't like I'd heard a little bit is probably going to be EA, but I know Microsoft had put in a bid at some point. So did Disney. When they were still their own entity. And there's even like going as far back as I think 2005 or 6, somewhere right in the middle of the 2000s, there was even talk of someone, looking to possibly buy out PopCap, or there's also talk of us going public. I think there were a lot of possibilities still on the table there. There's, investors and other people involved that were like really pushing to make this thing happen. Sooner rather than later, right around the 2011 timeframe.
Yep.
A mail went out, and it was like Electronic Arts is the winning bid. And I had worked for EA in 2000. I think I mentioned that in the previous episode, and didn't go too well. But from somewhere up in the company that I have no idea. I don't know what went wrong there, but all I know is that suddenly I was under that same company again. And so my response was to lay down on the floor for probably 15 minutes, and I couldn't really talk. I just kind of laid there because it wasn't just the previous experiences that I just invested 7 years in PopCap, and it felt like it was big. I don't really know, is this bad? Is this good? Is this, I didn't really know. I did know that, there was a bunch of us that had received kind of stock shares over the years, stock options, that all of that was going to then mean something, and it didn't mean anything up to that point, and so suddenly it was this big paradigm shift that we just kind of had to digest, and there was no I felt like I was in a good spot at the company then, like cool things are happening, we're all doing fun stuff, I feel like there was a big positive, there'd been a bunch of shit that went down, but I felt like we're all in kind of like really cranking on all cylinders at that point, and so there was that was kind of a mix of it too, is like we were kind of optimistic, but then this big kind of crazy thing just happened. And we didn't know what it meant yet. And
I think there was I obviously I didn't come into it with the same backstory, I guess, about EA as you had. So for me, I just sort of, and like you, I was kind of aware that there was this talk of IPO / being sold, but as kind of a newbie to certainly the world of games and the world of big corporations, I was just sort of like, okay, whatever, I'm trying to make some games here. So I didn't really, know all that much about any of the backroom stuff that was going on. But then, as you say, they're like, we got sold. You probably heard, it's already been announced, it's being talked about in the business media. We, everybody, we're going to have an all hands. And I don't remember which hotel it was, but some Seattle downtown hotel. They booked a ballroom. Everybody just went down to the ballroom. However, by that time there was probably like 100 or a couple hundred people, because PopCap was in one of its sort of expanded phases, which it had sort of, it would kind of expand and then contract and expand and contract, and so there was a fair number of people there, and John Riccatello basically gave this big speech, which I'll be curious to hear your reaction of my reaction, because what I remember from the speech was like, this is going to be great, like we're going to have a ton of, you guys are all going to get paid out, but we're really excited about these bonuses, like this 500 extra million if we can hit these targets, and we absolutely believe that PopCap is going to make these targets. I mean, Bejeweled as a franchise is worth like $75 million, and we just need to do that another 5 times. And we were all so drunk on the Kool-Aid and the liquor at that point that we were just like, yeah, all right, okay, we're going to make 5 more Bejeweleds, of course. we're PopCap. We can do anything. So, from my perspective, it was just total jubilation.
Well, it was really it was a pep rally, which makes sense. That's a good time for one. And that I you reminded me of that march down there, and it was just kind of like we're all just kind of bewildered and excited, and like wow, like this thing happened. It's like this creature just crawled out of the ocean and started walking on all fours or something, and we're like, whoa, it's a whole new world, you know? And yeah, it was. I think a necessary pep talk, and they really wanted to. And like you say, we were all kind of drunk on the Kool-Aid at that point. We were doing good, and as mentioned in a previous episode, we've been a company that we're given a lot of positive feedback for what we did weekly, even, and so it was easy to like, well, let's just keep this thing going. Let's go big now, you know. Like I think we were all
like, this is going to give us the tools. We're going to get the support from EA. They're going to be able to do a bunch of stuff for us that we wouldn't be able to do alone, you know, like, and so it was just this great road forward of like, now we're being backed by the biggest guys. We know who we are, and we're going to just deliver on this stuff, and we're going to be awesome.
Yeah, and all that made a lot of sense. Now that you remind me that, yeah, there was this talk of, yeah, it's going to be a big push to do, you know, things that we've never done before. We're going to go really big with this, but we do have this added support, you know, from a company that's been pushing everything from Madden and Battlefield and everything else going on. Like, they got the big bucks, they got all of the infrastructure in place for marketing this stuff and just getting it in front of as many eyes as possible and just really pushing it. That was encouraging. I think that rally kind of accomplished what it set out to. So it was kind of a reassuring talk from the leadership of PopCap as it had been, and it was kind of and then they kind of handed the ball off to the leadership of EA, like, all right, folks, this is happening, and here's why it's a good thing for you, you know, and
think big was the mantra, right?
Yeah, all these little games that we've been working on, we're going to pick the best of them, and we're splitting them off into franchises, and then there's going to be a total like kind of restructuring around each of our products, not just as like, here's the next Peggle, here's the next Bejeweled or whatever, but each of these are franchises with creative leadership and with, you know, this kind of modular ownership. But just right on, they're just these different structures that we had to then kind of wrap our heads around, which also made sense in the terms of what we were, engaging with EA.
But a lot of excitement, but also like some reservations on your part. I mean, you got your story about the handshake.
Yeah. Well, once the big rally was over, everyone just kind of disseminated into the crowd, and we all just had conversations. And I was standing in a circle with some of our biz dev folks and some other people, and John Riccatello was there, and I really wanted to go like say, hey, I used to work at the EA studio in Bellevue on Motor City Online, and so I did. I walked up and introduced myself, and yeah, he shook my hand. It was kind of like this old empty leather wallet that was kind of cold, and he just kind of like put his hand in my hand, and I just kind of shook the limp wallet, and I remember him smelling a lot like fish, like maybe he just eaten a lot of fish, but there was just an intense fish smell going on in that moment.
An old empty leather wallet is not how you want your CEO to be described.
That was the kind of like the wind up to like, okay, now I'm gonna put my spiel out there, and he said, oh yeah, the Need for Speed. So that was such a sad situation. There were so many talented people there. I was like, yeah, and such a great game, I thought. And he's like, yeah, Motor City Online. And then he turned to the person next to me and started describing the game. And he ended up describing Need for Speed World. It wasn't even Motor City Online. Just described a totally different game. And I didn't correct him, of course. That would have been
but you did actually kind of. You didn't just think about saying this to him. You did say it to him. You actually did give him the piece of your mind that you intended, which was a pretty sort of classic PopCap thing to do.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, so that happened, and it was kind of just put out there like, this isn't going to happen again. Well, I don't know. I can't claim to too much in that moment because I was kind of, it was a lot in one day. absorbed a lot in one day. And
Well,
so
I don't want
that was just kind of my one interaction with Riccatello. And, he seemed like a nice enough guy. He wasn't like, he didn't give me that cold corporate vibe. Like he was genuinely like, hey man, how's it going? And leading up to that, like we'd worked on a game called Pig Up, and he
right.
actually gave us some valuable
He
feedback.
did. So I didn't have any of this previous history with him, and I never got the chance to. Or if I did shake his hand, I didn't come away with it as with the sort of negative associations you did. And so I was sort of like, oh well, this is the CEO of EA giving us notes on our game that which we're not going to go down into the weeds about Pig Up, where that's episode 3.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in great depth next episode, but it'd probably pop up occasionally. And so, yeah, this was a thing where it's like, oh, okay, well, the guy's taking an interest in the stuff that's going on and his notes were reasonable. Like, he was clear he actually played the game a little bit and was, had some thoughts about it that were sensible. I don't think I have a copy of those notes anymore. I may have printed them out and still have them, but those are the kinds of things where I really wish I could go, man, I want to reread those notes from Riccatello. But again, we don't want to get bogged down into Riccatello necessarily or Pig Up. Then I just go ahead.
Important to put it out there though, that he did kind of climb down into our world and play our little web game that we've been working on and put out some valuable feedback on it. So I mean, definitely to his credit in that regard, he wasn't just all business all the time. And on the upper level, and he was genuinely a nice guy in that moment. It was just I came away with the odd handshake, and then the just kind of like tuned out of what really happened at the other studio, other than it went down, and that was sad.
Yeah.
And here's this game that he didn't know. He knew more about Pig Up than he did Motor City Online, I gotta say.
And then everybody just sort of went to the Two Bells, which maybe we'll have an episode about the Two Bells at some point. But the Two Bells is sort of like the PopCap watering hole, and just got obliterated. Like I wouldn't surprise me if it was like a $10,000 liquor bill that evening. I have some photos that I sent to you. Maybe we'll drop them into here. Just get to the YouTube here to get a quick glance at what the scene was like in the patio of the Two Bells. And yeah, everybody just got super drunk because it was for good or ill. It was an incredibly consequential, eventful day for sure.
Yeah, we'd spent years building up this way of dealing with light levels of stress or exuberation or just kind of overstimulation, and that was to go stimulate ourselves further at the Two Bells with whiskey and gin and whatever got put in front of us.
So at this point, I want to move on to the kind of the nitty gritty section, the follow the money. I'm kind of assuming that that's what people really want to know about. Is like, okay, how much, right? And so first, I'm going to start off with my kind of admittedly incomplete sense of what the state of ownership of PopCap was at the time of the buyout, which was, so for me, as I understand things, and maybe Jason will hear this and go like, you're so wrong, you don't understand any of it. But my understanding was that like it started out with the 3 founders basically having third shares, and then Dave Roberts was brought in at like something like 10% owner. So now it was like Dave Roberts 10%, the founders 30 each. You had mentioned in some of your notes before about like there was all this talk of like some angel investor guy who had come in and bought a chunk in order for like just cash to help us with our cash flow issues, and ended up with like a significant chunk of the ownership. I don't know to what extent other members of the higher up executive level folks, like maybe like the Sprout guys, like when they were brought in, whether they got like explicit ownership percentages or how that worked.
There are definitely some other big business folks that got pulled in who had lots of contacts and really knew their business, and everyone was kind of buying in at that point.
And so
But a lot
now,
of that happened in the years leading up. Like when I
right.
first heard of that kind of big phantom investor who apparently lived on a giant property in Hawaii that had like a waterfall and all these cabins, and sometimes people would go out there and visit. And that's someone who I if I'm correct, I could also be corrected on this. That went down in the mid 2000s. Like that person was kind of part of the whole trajectory of the company from the business perspective early on.
And I think there was
Uh,
some stuff about like I think Brian and Jason had bought John out, or at least partially bought out some of his interests at some point as well. So there was certainly it was like there was a fair number of high level individuals who had like important ownership stakes in PopCap. And then now here's the part that I honestly just don't know. Maybe you know better. Is like, and then some component of that was for stock options, and stock
mhm,
options were the kinds of things that like employees got, right? Like either they
mhm.
got them yearly or got them as part of their like signing, or it was just part of their compensation, and those stock options represented some cumulative ownership that then I have to assume would be represented by some stake
Mhm.
in the ultimate buyout price. But I don't know at all what the ratio would be. Like how much of the money, how much of that $750 million, 650 cash, 100 million stock, was broken out to pay out the options. I just don't know if it was
Mhm.
like 10%, 30%, 50%. I do know that like, everybody I don't think everybody got as much as they would have liked, cuz everyone would have liked to have had all of it, but my understanding was that the PopCap owners did pretty right by the employees. Like they did portion off a significant chunk to the paying out of all those options.
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of companies try to operate in the way that PopCap did, in the sense that during like, yearly reviews or quarterly reviews, giving little stock option packages to employees as incentives and whatnot. And I had, yeah, 3 different times while I worked there, I was pulled into an office and given stock options. It was very generous, and and it really speaks to, I think, the heart of the company that they were doing that, looking to keep people on and keep people engaged and keep people excited about what they're working about. And then on the flip side, also celebrating all of these wins that we would have along the way. It really created a momentum. The thing is they held true to it. There are a lot of companies these days that will pull that rug out from
Right.
underneath an employee just before that stuff gets cashed in. I've heard of, I'm not going to mention the big name companies that I've heard do this, but like we'll march a person right up to, the last week, and they'll be like, "Oh, sorry, you're done."
Well, isn't like
And
a plot point in the Social Network, the movie, something like one of the three essentially co-founders of Facebook, via some sort of legal jiggery pokery, essentially got like signed something that meant that it's like, oh, you get all like you think you have this chunk of stock, but actually that's all just what you have is like 100% of 5%. Like
yeah,
we slid all, some kind of like stuff like that is evidently commonplace, and particularly as I understood it from my time in PopCap, but just sort of observing the video game business, is that it was very common, and not just video games, like tech in general, is that's how startups get like their employees, right? Is they say we
mhm,
can't
mhm,
pay big bonuses right now, or now PopCap was a weird exception to that, but it
mhm.
was very common in tech that early employees would get stock options as the carrot, to come in and go, okay, well, I'm going to invest my time and my energy, maybe not at top rates, but I believe in this company, and when it sells, I'm going to have like my the majority of my compensation ultimately will come from the realization of these stock options.
Yeah, and PopCap was really good about handing that out to everyone in the company. Everyone, as far as I know, and again, I could be corrected on this, but as far as I know, like everyone around at these different times got a chunk of that. Now, there's some people that feel like they should have just been recognized more and not have had to have advocate for themselves. Totally understandable. I think at the same time, I can't fault anyone for it. It was just kind of like a wild time, a lot of stuff going on, and it might just have been based on how freaking loud we were about things. I
Well,
don't
I
know.
think so. Yeah, I mean, like my understanding of it was that I started at PopCap and there were maybe like 20 to 25 employees there already. Like, and you were one of those employees who was at PopCap before I was.
In the
And
studio, at least.
in the studio, yeah. And I think a fair number of those people became instant millionaires the day of the buyout, right? Now, I did not become a millionaire. I don't think
I did not
you
either.
did either.
Nope.
And of course, this is not a cop out, but I can't give our listeners like a particularly solid dollar amount. I would if I could, but it's just like, well, what I got was a bunch of stock options, but that translated ultimately into EA stock that I have then sold at different prices over the years, right? So I could say that I've got like about 250 of it left and maybe have spent, or 100 of it prior. So that's probably in the ballpark of what I ended up with, was like maybe 350 grand, which is a nice thing to get for sure, but not $1 million, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to sort of think. It's like if they had said, again, we're going like, okay, here's our pot, here's our 750 million, and then we've got all these sort of major people with profit participation, and they go, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to like take this 100 million, let's say, and that's going to be the pool out of which we pay the stock options, right? And then you could easily sort of go, okay, well, if you had like 5 people who were getting like say $10 million, and then like 10 million or 10 people who were getting $5 million, so that's, and let's say it's 150 just to make it simpler. It's like, okay, so like 10 got 5, or 5 people got 10 people got 5, and then 50 people got 1, right? Or maybe like 25 people got 1, and then another 50 people got like $500,000 either, or something like that. So, and that's probably something like what it ultimately was, right? Still leaving, a significant chunk to be divvied up among the founders, Dave Roberts, this mystery investor, and whoever else had like, alpha level ownership stakes. But yeah, that's sort of how I see it. I mean, so what about you on your end? Like,
leading up to that point, I felt like, God, I couldn't get a pay raise to save my life around there. But then, how much can I complain about that when I get a big payout at the end of the whole thing too? It's like, well, that kind of compensates for it, and I kind of have to like readjust how I thought about things. I can't be that mad.
Yeah,
So I wasn't, and I'm not. And yeah,
but you
but it made me, it put me in a position where I could put a down payment on a house at a time where the housing crisis had just like brought the housing prices down to an all-time low here in the Seattle area. So I was able to jump in at that point. I mean, it's as if it was all timed perfectly. It's kind of crazy when I think back about it. The buyout, by EA was just timed perfectly with the bottom end of the housing crisis here. So
well, and I know that some of our colleague would have just sold a bunch of their stock right away and basically said, I'm out, right? I got my payout. And that would have been, I think, like whatever I don't know what EA stock sold for back in 2011, but I think it's a lot higher now. But some people had enough stock that they could sell, just go, yep, I've got like, 5,000 shares of EA stock and I'm selling them and I'm walking away with however much. And so, yeah, it's a weirdly difficult thing to sort of measure. I mean, or get like, yeah, and especially over the course of, again, like years and years and years later, things like what you're saying, it's like, well, I've got a house with it and the house is appreciated.
Just to clarify too, like when that buyout happened, all of the PopCap shares that we had from our previous meeting, the previous years that had gone on, was liquidated. Like we got that money in a bank account one day, and then had to pay a lot of taxes on it after that. There was kind of a tax situation that went on in the year to follow that was took a big shot out of it.
And then in following years you'd get like RSUs, which I think were like restricted stock units. I think you do your yearly review and they'd say whether or not you got a raise or a bonus, and they'd also you'd get some RSU grant, right, as part of your compensation. Like each grant was like, this will only vest a year from now, and only if you remain an employee of the company. If you don't, then you don't get it. So as an obvious incentive to stick around, because a lot of people like were like, I'm out of here. Like people sort of some people stuck around for, you know, a few months. I think some people just basically left almost immediately. Some were around for a year-ish, and they were like, I don't want to be here anymore, and left.
I
And
think I
so,
lasted 8 months, 8 months after the buyout, and I did drop a ton of RSUs on the floor. That became nothing, and I have certain regrets about that moment, but it was just there was just such a shift in the vibe of the place.
well, this is sounds like a pretty good transition to this sort of what it meant thing. Even though I do want to say one thing to wrap up the follow the money, which was just to respond to what you said earlier about like regrets about having, you know, not like for me personally, it was like, oh, I was kind of naive and it didn't occur to me to advocate for myself at the you know, my yearly reviews to say, hey, you know, I want more stock options. So it was sort of a surprise when other people who had been there much later, you know, walked away with, you know, 5 or 10 times as much as I did because they just had insisted on getting compensated much more heavily in stock options, which was kind of a, you know, I think you sort of go like, am I mad? No, I mean, I don't have any right to be mad. That was on me, but still, geez.
Yeah.
But
It was an interesting time. We're all kind of in this bubble of that information and how it all could have played out. The coulda, woulda, shoulda aspects of it are, you know, have huge consequence when you think back on it. We were given a cool opportunity that a lot of folks don't run into in the games industry, at least. Like I've seen a lot of companies come and go, and I've been at a number of different companies since PopCap, and
Right.
there was never any of that as a possibility.
Right.
Actually, the most recent company I was at, smaller company, there was kind of a possibility of that, but it really depended on how the business went.
We're just gonna keep coming back to it over and over again as like just the fact that PopCap started as a company with such a powerful revenue flow, right? Like that income from Bejeweled just made things possible that in most other cases were just not possible, right? Yeah. So well, so this is probably a good opportunity then to fully like move on to our last section, which is just sort of talk about so what did it mean. So I want to sort of set the scene here a little bit to kind of go. So basically, what we're talking about here is a PopCap is a company that's like fully independent, just making games for the rock and hell of it. Like we've got money coming in, we're just gonna hire a bunch of cool dudes, we're just gonna make cool games, and that was really just what the vibe was for years. You know, I started in 2005, and it really was just sort of trucking along like that. Then it sort of shifted to a company that was now trying to get acquired. And when a company is in that position, it kind of has different goals and it has different motivations and different behaviors, right? Then once it had become acquired, it's like, okay, now this is not an independent company anymore. This is a studio inside a much larger company. So I just want to run through the before and the after. So it's like games before. So this is like from 2000 to 2011. That was the OG pre EA PopCap. Made 79 games, or like different versions of those games. And that would include things like Bejeweled, Bejeweled 2, Bejeweled Twist, Bejeweled Blitz, Bejeweled 3, Peggle, Peggle Knight, Bookworm, Bookworm Adventures, Zuma, Zuma's Revenge, Zuma Blitz, Plants vs. Zombies. All those games came out prior to EA buying PopCap. Now, so 2011 to 2026, that's 15 years. So 12 years versus 15 years, 79 games in the before version. In the after version, 23 games. So basically a third as many, less than a third as many games came out. The like big ones would be Plants vs. Zombies 2, Peggle 2, and PvZ Garden Warfare, which was like the 3D shooter that was out of the PopCap Vancouver studio. So nothing new. All iterations of previously established franchises from pre-EA PopCap.
It really speaks to the shift in focus for sure.
And that to me was such a big thing. Was like the biggest change was that PopCap became kind of gun shy about releasing games. Because it used to be, it's just like, we're just going to make games, and some will be hits, and some will maybe not be hits. We're just going to make games because we like them. But then there was a period where it's like, okay, well, now we have a brand to protect, right? We can't put out a game that's not a hit anymore. We can't risk that. So Pig Up, I think, ultimately was partially, and we'll get into it in more detail next episode, but there was a partial casualty of that kind of thinking. Popcorn Dragon is another case where it's like, this is actually a perfectly fine, fun game with like a neat mechanic, but it's like, but do we think it's going to be a huge hit? And we're not sure, so
Unpleasant Horse.
we're not, Unpleasant Horse. So it was just by PopCap just sort of changed from an organization. So we just make games and get them out there and see how they go, right? Like there was a time where people didn't really think that Plants vs Zombies was going to be a hit. It was like, I don't know. I mean, our audience is, well, yeah, like now that I mean, I didn't know it was going to be a hit because I don't know what's going to be a hit, but but at the time, remember before Plants vs Zombies was like, I don't know. I mean, like our core audience are like moms and grandmas playing Bejeweled, right? Like I don't know if they're really gonna want this game that's zombies and all that kind of stuff. So it would just go, well, hell, let's just put it out and see what happens. And I want to go back to really pointing out Dave Roberts. I always consider this to be his influence. Maybe wrongly, but to me, he was always just about like, you guys just make the games and I will sell them. Essentially, it's like I will stick them on anything with a computer chip, and we'll just make money if you make a great game, then I will find places to put it where it can earn us money, and that's just how PopCap was at the time. Just make the games, and then figure out how to make money with them. And then it sort of in the lead up, it started to change to how are we going to make money from this game was the first question, rather than what is this awesome game that we can make.
There was kind of like a slow creeping lead up to it, and I think the biggest questions I'll always have are like what were directives from on high and what were just a matter of course for bringing in new folks.
In your sort of pre-show notes, you were talking about that. So, like, and again, this is in the lead-up phase. So, important to think of like sort of three phases, like classic golden age PopCap, lead-up PopCap. This is where old PopCap was sort of changing itself in order to become an acquired thing, and then post-buyout. And so, you have been like one thing you sort of eloquently discussed in some of the notes you sent me about like. One of the things you could tell was that we were starting to kind of pick up these oddball flakes from the computer industry, where you used to be sort of like, oh, every time we hire someone, we could just go, well, if I hired them, they're awesome. I mean, we're PopCap. We don't hire non-awesome people. And then all of a sudden you start looking around going like, where did this guy come from?
Awesome. Yeah. Early on, we had small teams that had a lot of control over their own output and what they were doing, and had lots of check-ins, and it was all very integrated with leadership. Could check in and see how things are going, help with design ideas, and talk about the business of it as the game was being developed. And it was great. And then there was kind of, I think, a push to pull like the real leadership of the company up into the more into business area and bring in a layer of middle management that can handle that stuff. Instead of just having our one go-to Sukhbir as a producer on all the games, let's just get a bunch of different kind of middle management entities in there to work this stuff.
Yeah, like Sukhbir is another big name like that probably should have come up earlier. Like he was one of the early. Like I think he was there before Dave Roberts was, he was there.
You would almost consider him a founder back in the day.
Close to, yeah. I mean, he came up. I mean, he knew Jason before Jason met John or Brian, right? So and Sukhbir, I think, yeah. Like Sukhbir Sidhu would have been like the kind of lead producer for all the games ultimately, right? And then but then in the years, like let's say 2 or 3 years preceding the buyout, so this would have been like 9, 10, 11. You just sort of started to see this kind of like PopCap Star Chamber thing, where it's sort of like it wasn't just Sukhbir making these decisions anymore. It was like Sukhbir and Ed Allard and Joe McDonough and like this. Like, and I don't even know. Like, I just called them the PopCap Star Chamber. It was just like there was a number of executives that would sort of sit down and just discuss things.
And I think even prior to that, we're starting to see something that, as I stand back and look at it, and I've understood how the industry works a little better. There's a thing that companies will do at different times in their growth, and that is to hire in new people over the top of old people, pay them a little more, and give them the directive to just like turn the whole thing into a hot seat for old timers. And the old timer either rises up and flourishes in that environment and makes their worth known, or they peace out because screw this guy.
Right,
you know?
right.
And
Though I'd say that I think I ended up like halfway between those things, because I didn't peace out. I didn't rise up and go like, fuck you guys, I'm brilliant, make me an exec. I survived in that environment. But I don't know if I would say I flourished. We and there, a colleague of ours named Matt Holmberg, who will probably one day we'll see if we can get him on the show, but we worked, and certainly his name will come up many times in the Pig Up episode. But like, I think all three of us would share this idea. It's like we're just making games, man. Like we're just in the trenches, just doing the fucking thing. Like, just leave me alone and let me make some fucking cool games. Like we're gonna make the game, we're gonna ship the game, and then we're gonna move on and make another one, right? Like,
there's some funny stories in regard to when this first started happening, and one was where there were a lot of smart folks in the QA environment, and that's where I was at the time. This would have been 2007 or so. I was kind of at the top end of my time in QA, and suddenly someone new is hired in. They came over from, I don't know, some other bigger company. I think it might have even been EA. They were brought in as a test lead who was going to work on one game and then be pushed up into an associate producer position.
Right.
And we're all like, look, man, we've been doing this for ages here. Like, I would love to be an associate producer. Nope, sorry, we got this. We got a professional with us now.
Right.
And so the professional was hired in, and the first thing he did was take the first month off. Just wasn't even in the office for a month. So the game that we were going to put on him just kind of hung out during that time, and the rest of us kind of would like pull it into our schedule as we could. And then when he did finally show up, didn't pay attention to his game at all, and would wander around the studio and just kind of hang out behind the cubicle or desk of people that he saw as maybe a ladder rung, a way to climb up a little higher. And to the degree that he identified who the dope smokers were in the studio and would leave little like chunks of weed underneath their keyboards and just do kind of crazy stuff where everyone's like, what the fuck's this guy doing?
I remember this dude because I was the proud or less proud receiver of one of these little nugs. Just walk up and put a little nug next to my keyboard, and I'm kind of like. And then there was, if I'll tell the story about how the game called Venice, where you're like a little boat at the bottom and you're sort of shooting different shaped objects up into spots above. And there was this thing called Burrito, which was our mega tool. Maybe we might again have a whole episode about Burrito, but it was just sort of like our bulletin board, file transfer, the system whereby we organized all the games and everything else, but also just like the sort of company chat, and each game would have like chat channels as well. And so it was just sort of like, I've got this great idea for Venice. Like, why don't we have a bunch of different like hats and glasses and stuff, and we could sell them for as costumes, and you could switch between them with like the right mouse button. And Jason Kapalka was just went on and said like the right mouse button already does something. And I think he might have actually said, well, what does it do? And then Jason was like, you are the QA leader of this game. You don't know what the right mouse button does? And I think he was sort of like, and I think that probably was what precipitated ejection from the company.
I think it was maybe a week later, our head of QA, who just did amazing work on his own. And it was a shame to see him in a position where he had to fire someone because he hadn't done that before. But he certainly had to this time, and he did the job, and that's, and that was one. There were a couple other folks came along early on before the buyout that did just kind of like not work out, but there was this allowed to fail upwards thing.
Yeah, well,
and I don't know if it was ever like thought of that way. I don't think that was like the plan by any higher up, that like, oh, this person doesn't get it, isn't working out, and we'll just go ahead and promote them.
Well, I think it plays into like part of what you were saying before is like, again, this is this whole business of we are positioning ourselves to be an attractive acquisition target. So we are making kind of flashy hires of like big names in the video game business. And there are a lot of folks out there, not just in the video game business, but every business, who have big names but are actually just wet farts. Their whole thing is just they make a big deal of themselves, but all they're doing is just trading on the work of other people, but they are actually usually more often than not like damaging to the business as opposed to just not giving value. But they look great if you're putting their name on a list of like, look at all the cool people we hired over the last year. Buy us, right? And so
that's got to be the trade-off, right?
And so
over some big cheeses from Microsoft. There was a time we kind of have an internal joke about just creating like a decompression tank for anyone who came over from Microsoft, because there was this really sharp, like backstabby, ladder climbing, kind of sociopathic vibe that would just kind of come along with it. That was really that's not really how we operated and how we made games or just how we did anything at the company. And suddenly there was this element there that you couldn't really trust it. You didn't know what was going to happen next with some of these folks. And it just got more intense as we got closer to the buyout. There was someone who came through like 3 different interview runs, and everyone in the interview process, except for one person, gave him a thumbs down. Like, this person is just cynical.
Well, right. Yeah. Like, this is the element that I find really interesting, is that in tandem with this, we're going to start buying these sort of marquee employees, right? We're going to start bringing in these star names. There's, in tandem with that, there is, and we're also going to start not trusting our own people who, when they are involved in the hiring process, are going, no, red flags, don't hire this guy sucks. And it's like, we're not listening to you anymore.
That absolutely happened in just a dramatic fashion, until this person that everyone is like, wow, bad vibes. And suddenly they're just walking around the studio sneering at people and off in corners pontificating and thinking they're just so above these simple little
well right, yeah, because like was like ultimately kind of a harmless clown and didn't really do much damage and got hit with the ejector seat.
That was more comedy than anything else.
But then, we're both thinking of this, I think the same guy who was sort of brought in, and then that was just more, as you say, kind of like someone who was brought in and just sort of had this weird attitude of like, I'm better than this. Like, hey, we're going to sit you down and teach you how to use the tool. It's like, this tool's stupid, I'm not going to use it. Just kind of things like, what? Like, what are you talking about?
That's a quality moment. That was really expressive of exactly why I was hoping we would not hire this person, and then bam, like I got it just right in the face. I had just been part of the core team that had designed Zuma Blitz, and it was time to hand Zuma Blitz off to some new people making levels. And there's 2 guys that came downstairs to where I was sitting at the time. They're like, all right, show us how to put new levels in Zuma Blitz. I'm like, okay, we're kind of using some old Zuma's Revenge tech, and as we've kind of helped integrate that into a web thing, and it's a little gritty, but this is how it works. And I got like 5 minutes into it, and this person just stood up and said, I could create immersive environments in Unreal faster than I could do this. I'm not doing it. And just turned around and walked away. And to the credit of this other person who came down, they're just like, kind of like I was. We're just like, whoa, man, that's some attitude. And then he was just like, well, let's keep going. I'm like, cool, let's keep going. And then I taught that person how to put levels in Zuma Blitz, and they became the producer on Zuma Blitz at that point. Or at least the co-producer level. I'm not really sure how it worked out, but was successful in that moment, and huge props to that person. But and then it just kind of kept going with more and more trust being put into this person who just I would say hated the company and didn't like anyone who worked there. Like, that's just the vibe I got.
Well,
like,
and so as we're getting up towards the hour, so I think we're getting towards the part where we should probably bring it to a close. So then, like, just in thinking about like some of the big takeaways, then it's like, so what did it mean for EA to buy PopCap? At least I think out of this episode is kind of coming is that it's that process of being reorganized into something that looks like an attractive acquisition target. Unfortunately, just has these can have these negative consequences of culture change within the company, right? Where people are brought in because they've got a reputation but that reputation isn't backed up by ability and what a lot of these folks did not have, which those of us who were there for longer and who didn't have reputations, but we were just sort of handpicked, was that we loved the games we worked on. We loved the people we worked with for the most part. I mean, we can't speak for everybody, and then everybody, we certainly stipulate that it was not a giant happy family and everybody got along, but every single person was like selected for their ability and their passion. And somehow, like a couple of years, in the like, okay, now we're going to turn this into a thing that can be sold for $750 million, that shifted, right? Like that was like, okay, now we're sort of more business minded, and we're doing things that look smart and sound smart on paper.
And to that point, also something that I was meaning to mention earlier is that also went on to like actual game design. We started hiring actual game designers. The people who have been working on these things for nearly a decade, not so much. Now we're going to hire real designers, and it was just people who were, arguably good at what they did, but maybe didn't quite understand the PopCap or the changing environment, because we were right on the cusp of free-to-play.
Right, free-to-play, microtransactions.
Analytics on everything. Analytics starting to influence game design. We're right at that point, and I don't think they were ready for it, and we had been working up to it. I would say that there are a lot of us that have been there throughout those years that were ready to like start working in those directions with our games. But
because I mean that's a whole element that we could have gotten into. I don't want to get too deep into it, but yeah, this whole business of like metrics and analytic. Again, when I remember starting, we would just make a game, put a shrink wrap on it, and stick, and then sell it. Put a price on it and sell it. And this idea that like, well, no, you can actually have your video game, you can track player behavior on video games and use that and like if your game is like sort of a live service, that you iterate on the game and take in information from your players and modify the game as it's going, right? Which was just completely unknown to the kind of games that I worked on in the beginning. I mean, for my PopCap experience, where it was just like you make the game, you wrap it, you sell it, you move on to the next one, right? Now you, on the other hand, were kind of on that different angle of like live service games, right? Like Bejeweled Blitz.
Yeah. And then it became Zuma Blitz, and then it kind of peeled off into, we were going to start working that stuff into Pig Up, which we'll talk more about that in that episode. But there was also a Solitaire Blitz, and there was an attempt at making a Peggle game that worked in that way. There was an attempt at turning Plants vs. Zombies into a Farmville clone that failed horribly, unfortunately, before hardly anyone got to see it.
Well, and it just goes to show how, going all the way back to Riccatello going, all we need to do is just make like five more Bejeweleds. It's just like, people don't quite realize how any hit, any success is a bolt of lightning, right? And
exactly.
And to just think, oh, we could just do that again is, like even when you think it's like, okay, we're just trying to make a Facebook Plants vs. Zombies game. Like, we have all the pieces. This should work. And yet somehow, it's like, there's so many reasons. Like, there are far more ways for something to go wrong than there are for them to go right.
Yeah, it's the right time, right place, right idea. And then the market has to be like, that's what the market wants. There's kind of like there's this whole, and it's like music is like that, a band can come out and just be amazing and just no one gets it, doesn't like them, and they break up, and then 10 years later, it's like, wow, that band was amazing, and it's kind of a right time, right place, and games are totally like that,
All right. Well, so any final thoughts, and then I think we'll move on to just like what we hope for the next episode, and then we will peace out, I think.
Yeah. Just if people have any questions about this stuff or want to know more, is there a whole part of this we didn't cover that people are curious about? I'm sure we could talk about it more in a future episode, or maybe just answer a couple quick questions and comments. It is a big topic. It's a lot because it follows a company from this small place up to this high precipice of selling out to such a bigger entity, and there's just so many things that happen in that moment. And there's a lot that we don't know about necessarily either.
For sure.
There. We're just kind of telling it from our like kind of down here what we saw, and our long perspective of 15 years later.
Yeah. Well, you said selling out, and I was saying like we're both kind of Gen X types, And so one kind of quality of the Gen Xers is like, oh, like a hatred of like, oh, you sell out. But I've always been like, there's no such thing as selling out. There's just selling. You're just gonna take what you got and like sell it and make money with it. That's completely okay. That's what artists do.
Sellout is a connotation toward, if it was bad, that meant that artist had said previously that they wouldn't sell out. But like a game company is looking to sell games. We were always looking to push it to the, further and further. I don't think PopCap did anything that they didn't mean to do from the beginning. I don't feel like there was any sort of
all of our worst wounds were self-inflicted. Absolutely. Like certainly things did change after EA. Maybe we'll end up having another episode talking about that time. But I will stand by like the worst things that happened to PopCap, we did it to ourselves.
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay, so next episode, I think as we've mentioned a few times now, Pig Up. We will get into that. That was the exciting, sordid story of the little game that could and then couldn't and then did and then wasn't. And we'll talk about like how this sort of basically a name for a game was kind of floating around for a while, and then a mystery person, I won't use his name, kind of cracked the design and all sorts of crazy, like a whole like a microscope of like fast game design and like making a game in the midst of a huge corporate transition, blah blah blah. It should be a really fun episode. I think if you're enjoying the content here, hammer that like button, click the subscription thing, give a review in Apple Podcasts or stuff like that. Tell your friends, call your mom. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Isaac?
No, I think that's a great sign off, Steve. And I look forward to the next one.
All right. Yeah, Pig Up. All right. Well, with that, then, we will be back for next episode. And until then, this has been episode number 2 of the Unofficial PopCap PopCast.
That's right.
Yeah! PopCap!